Here, eat.
Thank you. Take this, it will guide you.
Thank you. I'll be strong.
I know you will. I promise. Okay, now try this part.
Like this?
Yes, perfect. Good job.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, let's see what happens next.
Yes, keep reading.
Look up there. What do you see?
The sky, a bird.
In the crowded and restless city of Lagos, where the air was thick with dust, smoke, and the constant noise of traffic, lived a boy named Juzo whose life had already been shaped by struggles most adults could not endure. At only 15 years old, he carried responsibilities far heavier than the tray of water sachets he balanced carefully on his head each morning. The streets knew him simply as the water boy, the thin child who ran between buses shouting, "Pure water. Cold pure water." His voice echoed through the chaos of the city, yet few people ever stopped to wonder about the story hidden behind his tired eyes. Juzo lived with his sick mother in a small broken room at the edge of a poor neighborhood where survival was a daily battle. Their house was barely a house at all, just cracked walls, a leaking roof, and a thin mat on the floor where they both slept. At night the buzzing of mosquitoes filled the room while the loud humming of generators from nearby buildings shook the walls. Despite the poverty surrounding them, love still lived quietly in that small space. His mother, though weak and often coughing painfully, always tried to smile at him. Every morning before the city fully woke, Juzo would hear the sound of her cough echoing through the room. It was a deep cough, the kind that seemed to tear through her chest, and each time it happened Juzo felt a sharp fear inside his heart. Still she would wave her hand and say softly, "I am fine, my son. It is only a small cough." But Juzo knew it was not small. The sickness was slowly stealing her strength day by day. Even so, she always forced a gentle smile because she never wanted her son to worry. That smile became the only light guiding Juzo through his difficult life. After checking on her each morning, he would pick up his tray filled with sachets of water and step barefoot onto the dusty streets of Lagos. The tray was heavy, but his determination was heavier. He walked through long lines of traffic, weaving between yellow buses and motorcycles, shouting his call again and again hoping someone would buy. The hot sun burned his skin and the dust covered his feet, yet he never complained because every coin he earned meant food or medicine for his mother. When people bought water from him, he would carefully fold the small notes and hide them inside a nylon bag tied around his waist. Sometimes he made just enough to buy Gary and a few tablets from the roadside pharmacy. Other days he returned home with barely anything at all. Yet each evening when he entered the room and saw his mother waiting, weak but smiling, he felt that the long exhausting day had been worth it. Sometimes when business was slow, Juzo allowed himself to dream for a moment. He imagined going back to school, wearing a clean uniform and holding books instead of a tray of water. He imagined buying a real bed for his mother or maybe even a small electric fan so she could sleep comfortably during the hot nights. But dreams in his neighborhood were fragile things, easily broken by reality. One evening after a long day under the harsh sun, Juzo returned home with 950 naira in his pocket, proud because it was enough to buy rice and medicine. But when he opened the door, the room felt strangely quiet. The small bowl of food he had left for his mother earlier remained untouched. Fear gripped his chest as he rushed to her side and called softly, "Mama?" Her eyes slowly opened and she smiled weakly, whispering that she was just tired. Seeing her struggle to sit up filled Juzo with worry, and he begged her to visit the hospital the next day. She only laughed faintly and shook her head, saying hospitals were not for people as poor as them. That night he sat beside her holding her hand, silently praying she would still be alive when morning came. But when the first light of dawn entered the room and the distant call to prayer echoed across the city, Juzo realized something was terribly wrong. His mother lay still beside him, her face calm but lifeless. Her hands were cold. He shook her gently and called her name again and again, but she never answered. In that moment the small room felt emptier than the entire city. A scream burst from his chest as the painful truth crashed into his heart. The only person who had ever loved him was gone. The morning after Juzo buried his mother, Lagos woke up like nothing had happened, as if the city had no space for grief. The streets were already alive with honking buses, shouting market women, and the distant sound of music blasting from old radios, but for 15-year-old Juzo the world had lost its color. He stood quietly beside the small church where his mother had been buried the previous evening, staring at the fresh mound of soil that covered the only person who had ever loved him. The rain from the night before had softened the earth, and a corner of the rough wooden coffin had slightly revealed itself through the wet sand. Juzo knelt down slowly and pushed the soil back into place with trembling hands, whispering softly, "Rest well, Mama." For a long moment he remained there, his eyes heavy with tears he had already cried too many times. But life on the streets did not wait for anyone's pain. Hunger was already knocking at his stomach, reminding him that grief could not replace food. With a deep breath, he stood up, wiped his face with the back of his dusty shirt, lifted his tray of sachet water, and began walking back toward the busy road. The same streets that had taken everything from him were now the only place he could survive. That day marked the beginning of a much harsher chapter in his life. Without his mother, the tiny room they once shared felt like an empty shell. The landlord had already warned him that rent must be paid soon, but Juzo had no money left after spending everything on the burial. Still he tried to continue his daily routine, walking through traffic and shouting, "Pure water. Cold pure water," hoping to earn enough to stay afloat. Yet every evening when he returned to the room, silence greeted him instead of his mother's warm smile. The loneliness pressed heavily against his chest. After a week passed without rent, the landlord finally lost patience. One afternoon when Juzo returned from selling water, he found a heavy padlock hanging on the door. All the few belongings he and his mother owned had been thrown outside in a small pile on the dusty ground, her faded wrapper, an old cooking pot, and a worn Bible she used to read at night. Juzo slowly sat beside the pile, holding the Bible tightly against his chest as the sun began to set. That was the moment he understood that he truly had nowhere left to go. That night the street became his home. For the next few days, he slept under an abandoned wooden kiosk near the crowded market. The nights were cold and uncomfortable, filled with buzzing mosquitoes and the smell of dirty gutters nearby. His only blanket was his mother's old wrapper, which he wrapped around himself whenever the wind grew stronger. During the day he continued selling water in traffic, but life had grown more dangerous. Without family or protection, he was just another vulnerable child wandering the chaotic streets of Lagos. One afternoon, while trying to sell water near a busy intersection, a well-dressed man in a black car called him over and bought a sachet. As Juzo reached into his bag to return the change, another older boy suddenly rushed forward, grabbed the entire tray of water, and sprinted away. "Thief! Stop!" Juzo shouted as he ran after him, his bare feet slapping against the hot pavement. But the thief was faster and disappeared into a narrow alley before Juzo could catch him. Exhausted and heartbroken, Juzo fell to his knees in the middle of the dusty road. That tray contained all the water he had bought with his last money. Now it was gone. People walked past him, some glancing briefly, others laughing as if his pain was just another street performance. No one stopped to help. When the sun finally began to set, he slowly stood up and whispered to himself, "Even the poor can be robbed." That night he slept hungry beneath the kiosk, staring at the dark sky above the city. But hunger was not the only danger waiting for him. The streets had rules, and boys like him who had no gang or protection often became easy targets. A few days later, a group of older street boys surrounded him near the market corner. They were known in the area for controlling the hawking zones. One tall boy with a scar across his cheek stepped forward and said with a mocking smile, "Water boy, you day sell for our street but you never pay us." Juzo tried to explain that he barely made enough money to eat, but before he could finish speaking, one of them slapped the tray off his head, sending the sachets bursting open in the dirty gutter water. The leader leaned close and whispered coldly, "Next time we see you here without paying, you will bleed." Juzo picked up the empty tray silently and walked away, his feet bleeding from stepping on broken glass. He did not cry. The tears had already dried somewhere deep inside him. Weeks slowly passed, and the streets of Lagos began to shape Juzo into someone stronger, but also someone much quieter. Every morning he woke up before sunrise under the broken wooden kiosk near the market, his body stiff from sleeping on hard ground and his stomach already aching from hunger. The city around him never seemed to rest. Even before daylight fully arrived, buses were already roaring through the roads, conductors shouting for passengers, and traders preparing their stalls for another long day. Juzo would wash his face at a public tap, straighten the torn shirt on his thin shoulders, and lift his tray of sachet water again, stepping back into the endless traffic. Pure water. Cold pure water, he would shout while weaving between yellow buses and motorcycles, hoping someone would notice him. Some days he earned just enough to buy a small plate of gari or bread. Other days he went to sleep with nothing but water in his stomach. Hunger slowly became something he learned to live with. But hunger was not the worst thing the streets offered. The worst thing was loneliness. No one asked about his past. No one cared where he slept at night. To most people he was simply another street boy trying to survive in a city that had no patience for weakness. One afternoon under the blazing sun, Juzo stopped beside a busy junction to rest his tired legs. A bus conductor who had bought water from him earlier refused to pay. When Juzo politely asked for his money, the man laughed loudly in front of the passengers. "What will you do?" he mocked. "Go call your father." The words pierced deeper than the man probably intended. Juzo stood silent for a moment before whispering softly, "I no get papa." The conductor stopped laughing for a second, slightly embarrassed, but the bus had already driven away, leaving Juzo alone in the dust. Experiences like that slowly hardened him. He learned that fairness was rare on the streets. People took advantage of weakness whenever they could. Yet he kept going because stopping meant starving. As days turned into weeks, Juzo began moving from one part of the city to another, Surulere, Apapa, Oshodi, anywhere traffic slowed enough for hawkers to sell water quickly. Still, danger followed him everywhere. One evening while he was selling near a crowded market corner, the same gang of older street boys returned. Their leader, the tall boy with the scar, blocked his path and smirked. "You again," he said. Before Juzo could react, one of them kicked the tray from his head. The sachets burst open and water spilled across the dirty ground. The gang laughed as if it were a game. Juzo quickly bent down to gather the remaining sachets, but the leader shoved him backward. "We warned you before," he said coldly. "This street belongs to us." With nothing left to sell, Juzo walked away quietly, his feet dragging across the pavement. That night he found a small space beneath a bridge and curled up beside his empty tray. Rain began to fall slowly, dripping through cracks in the concrete above him. He hugged his knees tightly, trying to stay warm. For the first time in many days, his mind wandered back to the life he had lost, the small room, the sound of his mother coughing, the way she would still smile even when she was in pain. He closed his eyes and whispered into the darkness, "Mama, I dey try." But the streets had one more cruel lesson waiting for him. One stormy night in November, while taking shelter outside a closed shop, a group of drunk street boys ran under the same wooden shade to escape the heavy rain. At first they ignored him, but soon one of them noticed the small plastic bag that contained everything Juzo owned. "Who be this small rat?" one boy laughed as he kicked the bag across the floor. Juzo quickly reached for it and shouted, "Stop." The word barely left his mouth before they turned on him. Punches and kicks came from every direction. Juzo fell to the muddy ground, curling his arms around his head as they beat him without mercy. Rain mixed with blood as it ran down his face. When they finally grew bored and left, he lay there motionless under the cold storm. For a long time he stared up at the dark sky above Lagos. The city lights blurred through the falling rain as tears slowly rolled down his cheeks. His voice trembled as he whispered into the night, "Mama, why you leave me alone for this world?" But the only answer he received was the distant sound of thunder echoing across the city. The rainstorm that night left Juzo weak, bruised, and burning with fever, yet the streets of Lagos had no sympathy for sickness. The following morning he woke beneath the bridge with aching bones and a pounding head, his body shivering even though the sun had already begun to rise above the crowded skyline. For a few minutes he remained lying there, staring at the gray concrete above him, wondering if he had the strength to stand. But hunger was stronger than pain. Slowly he forced himself up, wiped the dried blood from his lip, and lifted his cracked plastic tray again. The city had already come alive with its usual chaos, buses honking, traders shouting, and the endless rush of people moving through the streets as if the world depended on their speed. Juzo walked through traffic like a ghost among the living, his voice weaker than usual as he called out, "Pure water, cold pure water." That day hardly anyone bought from him. His hands trembled from exhaustion, and many drivers simply waved him away. By afternoon the little strength he had left was almost gone. He sat quietly by the roadside near a small food stand where a middle-aged woman was frying puff-puff in a large black pot of bubbling oil. The sweet smell filled the air, making his empty stomach twist painfully. He tried not to stare, but his eyes kept drifting back to the golden balls of dough rising in the hot oil. The woman noticed him after a while. She watched the thin boy sitting silently with his empty tray and tired eyes. Finally she called out gently, "You, small boy, you never chop today?" Juzo looked down at his feet, embarrassed to answer. After a moment he shook his head slowly. The woman studied him for a second, then reached into a small bowl, picked 2 freshly fried puff-puffs, and handed them to him across the wooden counter. "Take," she said softly. "God go bless you." For a moment Juzo simply stared at the food in his hand as if he could not believe it was real. His throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you, Ma," he whispered quietly before eating. The sweetness felt like life returning to his body after days of emptiness. That small act of kindness warmed something inside him that the streets had almost frozen. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low behind the crowded buildings, Juzo wandered through another busy road searching for a place to rest. His legs finally carried him toward a quiet compound where a small church stood behind a rusted metal gate. The sign above it read House of Mercy Ministries, though Juzo barely noticed the name. What caught his attention was the shade from a large tree near the entrance and the smell of food coming from inside the compound. Too tired to keep walking, he sat down near the gate and leaned his back against the wall, placing his empty tray beside him. Inside the churchyard, a woman in her late 40s was arranging plates of rice and beans on a wooden table. Her name was Mama Esther, a woman known in the neighborhood for feeding anyone who was hungry, even when she barely had enough for herself. As she worked, she suddenly noticed the quiet boy sitting outside the gate, his clothes torn and his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Something about his eyes caught her attention, the kind of sadness that only someone who had suffered deeply could recognize. She walked toward him slowly and asked in a calm voice, "My son, you don't chop today?" Juzo hesitated before answering. Pride fought with hunger inside him. Finally he whispered, "No, Ma." Without saying another word, Mama Esther went back to the table, filled a small plate with rice and beans, added 2 pieces of fried plantain, and returned to the gate. She handed the plate to him gently. "Take," she said with a warm smile. "No worry about money." Juzo held the plate carefully, almost afraid someone might take it away before he finished. "I go pay later," he said softly. Mama Esther laughed kindly. "If poor people day pay me, I for don rich since," she replied. That evening Juzo ate slowly beneath the tree, every bite reminding him that kindness still existed in the world. When he finished, he stood up and bowed his head slightly. "Thank you, Ma. God bless you." Mama Esther studied him for a moment and asked, "What be your name?" "Juzo," he replied quietly. "Where your family?" she asked gently. The boy's eyes dropped again. "Them no day again," he whispered. For a second Mama Esther's face softened with sadness, but she simply nodded. "If hunger catch you again, come here," she told him. "No shame at all." Juzo nodded silently, not realizing that this simple meeting would soon change the direction of his entire life. The next morning Juzo woke earlier than usual, not under the bridge but near the quiet church gate where Mama Esther had fed him the night before. The sky above Lagos was still pale blue as the first rays of sunlight slowly touched the dusty streets. For a moment he simply sat there holding his empty tray, wondering if returning to the church would make him look like a beggar. Pride had always been one of the few things he still owned. But something about the kindness in Mama Esther's voice pulled him back toward the compound. When he walked through the rusted gate, he saw her already setting up her small food stand again. Without saying anything, Juzo quietly began helping. He fetched water from a nearby tap, wiped the wooden tables, and arranged the plastic chairs neatly in front of the church building. Mama Esther noticed him after a few minutes and smiled warmly.
Ah.
You come again, she said. Juzo nodded shyly. I just want help small, he replied. The woman laughed softly. Then help well, she said, handing him a broom. That morning he swept the entire church compound without being asked twice. For the first time in months, he felt useful. The church members slowly began arriving for their morning activities, and many of them noticed the thin boy working quietly around the yard. Among them was a tall man in his early 30s with calm eyes and a peaceful voice. His name was Brother Samuel, one of the church workers responsible for opening the building every day. As he unlocked the church doors, he watched the boy sweeping the ground with surprising dedication. After a while he walked over and asked gently, Young man, what is your name? Juzo stopped sweeping and looked up respectfully. Juzo, sir, he answered. Brother Samuel nodded slowly. You work hard for someone so young. Do you attend this church? The boy shook his head. No, sir. I just help Mama Esther. Samuel studied him quietly, noticing the torn shirt, the tired eyes, and the humble way he spoke. Something about the boy's spirit felt different from the usual street children who passed through the area. You should come for service on Sunday, Samuel said kindly. You won't lose anything by hearing the word of God. Juzo hesitated. It had been a long time since he had stepped inside a church. The last time was during his mother's burial, a memory that still carried heavy pain. But he nodded slowly anyway. I will try, sir. That Sunday morning he returned again, this time not as a helper but as a quiet visitor. He sat on the very last bench inside the small church hall, holding his cracked tray beside him like a shield. The building was simple, with wooden benches and faded cream walls, but the atmosphere was filled with warm voices singing joyful songs. As the congregation sang, Juzo felt something strange stirring inside his heart, something he had not felt since before his mother died. When the singing ended, the pastor stepped forward. His name was Pastor Daniel, a gentle man with a calm voice that carried across the room like a warm breeze. He opened the Bible and began to preach. Sometimes, the pastor said slowly, God allows us to walk through pain not because he hates us, but because he is preparing our strength. Pain is like a seed. If you refuse to give up, that seed can grow into something beautiful. Those words struck Juzo deeply. He sat there quietly, staring at the floor, thinking about the nights under the bridge, the hunger, the beatings, the loneliness, and the promise he had once made to his mother. For the first time in years, he felt as though someone understood the silent battles inside his heart. When the service ended, people began greeting one another with smiles and laughter. Brother Samuel approached him again near the door. Thank you for coming, he said. Juzo nodded shyly. The message was good, he whispered. Samuel smiled. If you want, you can help us clean the compound every weekend. We can give you small work and maybe some food too. The boy's eyes widened slightly with surprise. For someone who had been invisible to the world for so long, even a small opportunity felt like a miracle. Yes, sir, he said quickly. From that day forward, Juzo returned to the church almost every morning. He swept the compound, arranged chairs, and helped Mama Esther prepare food for visitors. Slowly the members began to notice his honesty and quiet dedication. No one treated him like a street boy anymore. They began calling him Church Boy, a name that carried respect rather than pity. And though his life was still far from perfect, a tiny spark of hope had begun to grow inside him again, like a small light refusing to die in the middle of a dark city. Days turned into weeks, and Juzo's presence at the church became more than just that of a helper, it became the foundation of a quiet transformation. Every morning he arrived early, carrying his broom and tray, cleaning the compound and fetching water while Mama Esther prepared food for the needy. Brother Samuel often guided him, showing him small responsibilities like organizing chairs, folding mats, or helping younger children who wandered into the churchyard. Each task, no matter how tiny, gave Juzo a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Slowly, the church began noticing his intelligence and keen observation. Pastor Daniel, during one Sunday service, spoke about the importance of perseverance and faith, his words piercing through Juzo's memories of hardship and pain. After the sermon, Samuel invited Juzo to stay for a small literacy class run in the church office, where basic reading, writing, and arithmetic were taught. The boy hesitated at first, but when he sat down with a pencil and paper, a spark ignited inside him, a reminder that knowledge could be a new path out of the endless hunger and fear of the streets. Mama Esther, noticing his quiet interest, began bringing him small meals each day and encouraging him to stay until the lessons were over. Even the other church youth began accepting him, no longer seeing him as a street boy, but as someone willing to learn and work. Nights that were once spent under the cold, harsh bridge now became moments of rest on the mats in a small corner of the church office, where he could finally sleep without fear of rain or thugs. Money remained scarce, but the generosity of the church allowed Juzo to focus on learning instead of surviving every second. With every passing month, he grew taller, stronger, and more confident. Yet, he never forgot the pain that had shaped him, the hunger, the beatings, and the loneliness that had once threatened to break him. Those memories became a silent fuel inside him, driving him to work harder and never waste a single opportunity. One afternoon, Brother Samuel handed him an old, barely functional laptop and began teaching him basic computer skills. At first, Juzo struggled, his fingers stiff and clumsy over the keyboard, but soon he began mastering typing, writing simple sentences, and navigating the small programs available. It felt like discovering a new world. Knowledge, Samuel told him one day, can protect you from the streets, but humility keeps your heart alive. Juzo took those words to heart, and they became a compass for his actions. By the time he was 16, Juzo was no longer just a boy surviving the city streets, he was a young man carrying hope in his eyes, discipline in his steps, and a quiet confidence that drew others toward him. He still sold water occasionally, but now it was more out of habit than necessity. He carried himself differently, upright, careful with his words, and aware that the world was beginning to notice his resilience. And although the streets had once been cruel, he started seeing acts of kindness even in the smallest corners, the bus conductor who offered a smile, the vendor who shared extra food, the pastor and volunteers who took the time to teach him. Those small gestures, once unimaginable to a boy used to survival, became the pillars upon which Juzo began rebuilding his life. Yet he never forgot the first lessons of compassion from Mama Esther, the patience of Brother Samuel, and the guidance of Pastor Daniel. Slowly but surely, his broken childhood was being replaced by a life with direction, knowledge, and hope, a life where dreams were no longer fragile, but real possibilities waiting to be seized. And deep inside, one thought remained stronger than any fear: one day, he would not just survive, he would make a difference for others like him, children whose eyes carried the same emptiness he had once known, proving that even a city as harsh as Lagos could witness miracles of courage, persistence, and heart. Years had passed since Juzo first found shelter under the bridge, and the boy who had once sold sachet water in the burning streets of Lagos had grown into a young man whose heart had never forgotten hunger, pain, or loss. Every morning he walked through the same bustling streets that had once ignored him, now carrying a quiet determination and a vision he had kept alive since his mother's death, to give hope where none existed. The small church that had once fed him and offered him refuge had become his home in more ways than one, and under the guidance of Pastor Daniel, Mama Esther, and Brother Samuel, Juzo had learned not only to read and write but also to dream, to plan, and to act. One morning, as he arranged chairs in the yard, he noticed two young boys lingering at the corner, barefoot and dirty, eyes wide with hunger and fear, the same eyes he had once had. Something inside him stirred instantly, a memory of himself under the cold rain, abandoned and trembling. Without hesitation, he approached them gently, offering a small smile and a plate of warm rice and beans prepared by Mama Esther. "You are safe now," he whispered softly. "You will eat. You will sleep. You will learn." That simple act became the first seed of what he would later call the Juzo Foundation for Street Children, a place where no child would feel invisible, where hunger would be met with nourishment and fear with care. Over the following months, he began organizing small classes in the church office, teaching reading, writing, and basic math to street children who had never held a pencil before. Each child who arrived carried the same exhaustion, loneliness, and silent pain he once had, but under his guidance, they began to feel seen, valued, and loved. Juzo tirelessly worked to ensure that every child had a safe place to sleep, a meal to eat, and a chance to reclaim their childhood. News of his compassion and dedication slowly spread through the neighborhood. Bus conductors, food vendors, and even policemen started bringing children they found wandering or sleeping in markets, knowing they would be cared for. Despite the small resources, Juzo's heart overflowed with generosity, and he himself still sold water occasionally, not out of need, but as a reminder of where he had come from. When he finally stepped into a simple office behind the church, surrounded by a few mats, bags of rice, and the laughter of children at play, he could not help but remember the promise he had whispered to his mother so many years ago, to make her proud. Tears filled his eyes as he looked around at the children, each one a life that could be rebuilt, a chance to save someone from the same emptiness that once consumed him. That evening, after the last child had eaten and settled down, he sat alone under the mango tree behind the church, holding the Bible that had survived the eviction years ago. Its faded pages reminded him of his mother's words written long ago, "To my son, Juzo, may your life bring light where there is darkness." He traced the faded ink with his fingers and whispered, "Mama. I have done it." The stars blinked faintly over Lagos as the sounds of children laughing drifted through the compound, the same laughter that had been absent from his own life for so long. It was quiet, humble, yet powerful, a music that filled the emptiness he had carried for so many years. Juzo knew that life would not always be easy, storms would still come, streets would still be cruel, and hunger might still knock at the door. But he had become more than a survivor, he had become a guardian, a beacon, a living proof that even in the harshest city, kindness, determination, and unwavering faith could transform the impossible into reality. That night, as he finally lay on the small mattress in the church office, surrounded by the soft breathing of children and the faint glow of lanterns, he closed his eyes and smiled. His mother's promise had been fulfilled. The boy who once sold water in the streets had grown into a man who could now feed, shelter, and educate the children who walked the same path he once did, proving that the light of one life could ignite the hope of many, and that even in a city of shadows, miracles were still possible for those who dared to believe.